Hey everyone, Dan here. We are just a bit before market close on Thursday, July 29th. We're going to take our daily look at SoFi. Before we get into it, if you enjoy these videos, please hit the like and subscribe button. It helps a lot. And also keep in mind that these are my own thoughts, opinions, and ideas. These are not intended to be, nor should you take them as investment or trading advice in any way, shape, or form. Do your own due diligence, put in the work, and make your own decisions based on that. All right, so SoFi had a better day earlier than it's having right now. Obviously, you see this is the 1-day, 1-minute chart. So we had this slow but steady bleed down today from about 1614 here down to 1551, basically making use of this 1549 support zone down here. Now, all in all, it's a green day, and we're trying to get used to those sorts of things, so not that bad. But I am a little bit concerned about, its ability to maintain some of these things, but, we'll talk a bit more about that in a little bit. Volume today kind of keeping pace with the average, which we've been seeing the average pulled up and up and up and up recently because of all the volume increase that we saw along the unlock period at the end of June. And so this settling in on par with a 3-month, I'd really, as I know I keep saying in the videos, but I'd really rather see this about 1.5 times that average volume from the 3 months on these green days. And obviously we're not quite getting there yet, but that doesn't mean that we can't in the future. There's a lot of catalysts coming up for SoFi, and I think that this is going to be a heavily catalyst-driven stock, which is what we've been saying for a while, with the bank charter, with earnings coming up, with the rumors that we saw that come out yesterday and the night before about potential, whatever this Gemini situation is. I think this will be heavily catalyst driven, and I think there's a couple of ways that I'm thinking about that. One, as you've probably heard me mention, the grand vision of SoFi of making this one-stop shop, this unified platform or space for people to go to do all of these different financial things. I think that's what's attractive to me about the stock, and I think that that's probably the case for a lot of folks. But I do think that there's also quite we shouldn't underestimate the possibility that actually keeps a bunch of folks out of it for possibly a couple of reasons. One, they really question SoFi's ability to execute on that grand vision because it is such a hefty undertaking. Two, and I think this is probably more of the bulk of investors on whole, not people who love SoFi, not people who do consistent deep dives into SoFi or anything like that, but just the average person or even the average institution. They could see this as sort of like too much of a boil the ocean kind of company, and that those often tend to drown because they're trying to do too much, and they're trying to spread themselves too thin over too many different places. And in that way, they could either be sort of skeptical about it and sort of fall into the same picture as the folks who think that, it'll be hard to execute on. But I think for a lot of folks, a lot of average folks, it could just be confusing. Like, I don't really understand what it is they're trying to do because they're trying to do so many different things. It's not as clear of an elevator pitch or a one-liner to some folks, even though you might sort of default to this one-stop shop kind of situation, like unified under the umbrella of one company. But I think that for a lot of folks, that could cause more questions than it clarifies. So to me, that could be why something like Robinhood seems more straightforward, and so folks can digest that more easily. Like, okay, they essentially do like this one thing or these three things, and they're pretty obvious to me. Whereas SoFi, with a lot of the moves that I think we're going to see it make, it's going to look like pretty solid chess moves, I think, which is why I think that there's going to be a ton of upside here. I feel like I'm saying think a lot, but I just wanted to sort of say, that's where I'm coming from in terms of like how different groups of folks might be digesting SoFi as a whole and how they're looking at some of these run-ups and potential catalysts and things like that. Now, obviously, a bunch of what we saw today, we saw the run-up last night and then sustained through the pre-market today, and certainly at open, being driven by LendingClub, which is, again, one of those, I would argue, much more straightforward stocks. Like, I can understand what they're doing. I mean, their name is LendingClub. And we see here they had this huge surprise on earnings. The company reported second quarter earnings per share results of 9 cents, which beat the analyst estimate of a loss of 43 cents. And sales resulted of 204.4 million, which beat the 134.55 million estimate. So I wanted to mention this yesterday, and I don't think that I did, but I wouldn't be shocked, and this is sort of further evidence of that, but I wouldn't be shocked if with SoFi we end up seeing a pretty solid run up to earnings. And I think that SoFi for some period of time is going to be a very, very catalyst driven company. This is not the perfect analog. There's probably a better one out there, but it could be a little bit like Palantir has for quite a while been a pretty solid catalyst driven company. As contracts come in and contracts are signed and things like that, those have typically tended to drive interest. And on the flip side of that, analysts and Wall Street at large have seemed to really not be big fans of Palantir and write a lot of articles and talk a lot about how overvalued they are. And I feel like we see that a lot with SoFi as well, to be honest. I mean, you see these stupid, yes, they're stupid clickbaity articles, but just because you and I might know that they're stupid and clickbaity, they're clickbaity because people are clicking on them, right? That's why these companies or these sites are writing these, because clickbait in and of itself, yes, it's sort of a derogatory term from people who know better, but that still means that they expect this to drive a bunch of traffic to that article or to their site. And so to me, that says, okay, there's a lot of average folks out there who don't necessarily know any better, and they are digesting all this info. And you see here, SoFi Technology is a $10 or $20 stock. Well, I don't think that it's either. You can look at my SoFi price targets video to look at that. An unbalanced business could hurt SoFi Technologies. So I think, honestly, that we're mostly going to get into a relatively Palantir-ish situation from the standpoint of analysts and Wall Street are going to come across quite significantly as haters and are going to write all of these articles about why it'll never work and why it's overvalued and so on and so forth. And then with all these catalysts that sort of start to knock down some dominoes of this big vision that they have, that will start to turn around. And just sort of like the value will become undeniable just from the business perspective and from their ability to execute. Now, if we want to take a little bit of a broader look, well, let's stay here for a sec because I want to kind of see what we might be following up with tomorrow. Let's quick take a look at our indicators here. Now, we're just consolidating a bit. I was hoping that the push that we were going to get off of this 1551 was going to be quite a bit higher, and it was looking pretty good when we got this big buy volume, this big buy volume, and this big buy volume all in a relatively short period of time. But now we're seeing this just kind of slow, pullback that's happening. Now, my big hope here would be that we don't need to come back down and retest something like this 1557, that we can stay about where we are right now, right around this 1560, and push off of there. And then that could give us a nice potential run toward 1580. But we do need to overcome, again, this is just very, very short-term thinking, but we do need to overcome all of this recent topping out that we've seen around this area here. That's kind of been the kill zone. There's been a lot of folks happy to sell at that moment, and we need that to obviously be overcome. So right now, MACD is sitting just underneath the baseline and kind of losing to some bearish momentum that's coming in, and recent bearish crossover with a few minutes left in the trading day here. So we'll see if it can turn it around or if it kind of gives way to that. Because as we see, the most recent pushes, the bearish momentum is slightly dying down. So it'd be really nice to not see it make a comeback here toward the end of the day. If we can continue to squash that bearish momentum, that would give us the best opportunity for a quicker run up. Now, on the RSI side of things, we're sitting well below the baseline, or well below the midline at the moment. You see here, as it's had the inability to hold the midline, it's sort of just struggled back and forth between it. Now, the good news here that I see is, since it did dip down with the biggest point of sell-off today, down to 1551 there, reached it down into oversold. But then when it came back, it's been just kind of waffling around this midline. It hasn't necessarily been shoving it back down into oversold, which that's what would make me concerned if we double dip on this oversold without at least having come up into overbought territory in the interim. Then I'd be concerned that there's going to be a bunch more folks kind of taking these short-term profits or what have you, and it's going to be pushed down further. But let's kind of keep a close eye on the RSI to see what it does there. Now on the MA side of things, this is the 20, 50, and 200. So right now we're set up fully in a bearish formation, but that 20 and 50 aren't that far from each other. If we get a couple of solid green candlesticks here, we could certainly see that make an approach or even cross over before the end of the day. So we'll take a quick look at the data after we zoom out in a minute, and then we'll check on the chart right at close. We should have, I'm sure that I'll talk long enough to make to make that happen. That's not reassuring to anyone, I know. But if we zoom out a bit here on the 1 hour chart, this is where we're standing. So this is still continuing to look like potentially a nice push up here. We'll see where this pullback leads us. But if we have pullbacks like this, I feel very, very comfortable with that. This, to me, this could be the start of a nice trend reversal that we've been talking about here. Been saying, like, don't get too overly excited or exuberant about it. And also you have to remember a lot of today's run-up is kind of led by another company's good earnings. So, I wouldn't get too far ahead of ourselves. I do, though, still think there's a strong possibility that the run-up to SoFi's earnings could yield quite a bit of hype and quite a bit of buying pressure. So that's mostly what I'm looking for in the shortest of terms in terms of my investment, which is a longer term position. But I do think that these nice breaths that it's taking is a sign that this could be more of a true feeling trend reversal. You do see here on the hour, the 20 has bullish crossover of the 50 and then has more recently bullishly crossed over the 200, even though we've had this pretty big sell-off in the afternoon today. That's a good sign, obviously. On this longer term spectrum, we see a slight bearish crossover and sitting a bit above the baseline, but definitely a lot of opportunity that even if it does come down and tap the baseline, that we could have a nice push up off of it. I want to take a quick look at the daily because we've been watching strongly to see what I would think is the best indication of a reversal. We've been watching strongly the MACD, and here we finally see confirmation of the bullish crossover has happened on the daily on SoFi. To me, this is one of the best indications that we have an opportunity now to actually reverse this trend, that we had established the floor back right around this purple zone, okay, and we were able to bounce off of that, as was the hope, as was the hypothesis at the time. That's why the purple zone's there. It's a bounce zone. And we were able to hold that, even though it tried to make another run down at it. And this could be the beginnings, even though this is a fat red candle, this could be the beginnings of a trend reversal to the bullish side. On the MAs, we see it came in and it tapped its head on the 20 today. So we see this quite commonly where it treats these MAs as support and resistance zones as well. So it's hitting some resistance. If it can flip that 20 to support, and the MACD is continuing to increase the real estate between the MACD and the signal line, coming from well underneath the baseline, having taken a long time to squash all of that previous bearish momentum, huge opportunity here for us to run back up and make an attempt at that 1791 supply and demand zone and sort of get ourselves out of this yellow retracement. I would love to get that off of the screen for a lot of reasons. All right, let's flip over to the data. I want to mention this. In yesterday's video, I had talked a lot about Gemini and whatever Gemini means. Is it Gemini, the crypto exchange, or is it something completely different? This is the source of a ton of that information. Almost all of it, probably everything outside of the screenshots from like stock twits and Twitter from those couple of folks who had posted things. But go through this. It's a great researcher who did a lot of work here. and definitely deserves the kudos for that. So go have a look. I put a post out last night with the link because I had sadly forgotten to mention it in last night's video, and also I pinned it in the first comment in last night's video, and I also think that I added it to the description in last night's video. So you can click on it there, or you can just take everything prior to this UTM code and just punch this into your browser, and that will take you to the right place. Okay, so thank you, Reddit researcher, for that. The other thing that I'd keep an eye on, let me give a refresh here on, this is Ortex. Ortex is estimating a almost 15% short interest change today, and that just brings us to over 2% of the free float being shorted, which is very, very small. But a couple of things. One, that's a hefty increase, and it shows us, I would not forget the craziness, the war that short sellers put us through with IPOE. I wouldn't forget that. And they're still acting much the same, right? And so they saw some pressure coming in today. They saw some buying pressure. They saw a nice punch up, and they very, very quickly pounced on it. So yes, it still is a relatively small percentage of the float, but if you zoom in and say, okay, but what's happening at a more granular or day-to-day or minute-by-minute level? Well, they're coming in quite heavily. That's a big change in one day. And that could be a big part of this sell-off that we're seeing. Obviously, they piled in quite heavily. And so I wouldn't put it past them to try to really pounce on any sort of punch-ups that we see with the price action in SoFi. And obviously, if you go back to any of my IPOE work, I'm going to be keeping eagle eyes on these short sellers because we know what they have a tendency to do. So let's not forget about that as a driving factor. And also, current utilization, just over 12%. So there's a ton of lendership out there. There's a lot of shares that could be lent to short sellers at a relatively low cost to borrow. And so if we string together a pretty solid run here, I wouldn't be surprised if we see them come in really, really quickly and really heavily. All right, here, I had mentioned the run up to the earnings. Here we have after close on Thursday, August 12th, and I'm going to be looking very strongly at what the run up to that date looks like. Again, if the run up to the merger, and I know this is a very different thing, but I do think that this will be a catalyst-driven investment. I do think in the long run we'll see that it was certainly a catalyst-driven first few years, let's say that, in SoFi. And those can be good or bad catalysts, right? There could be things that they don't execute on well that could drive the price down, and that would be sad for all of the SoFi bulls. But, in the interim, I'm going to be seeing if this first catalyst plays out with a nice big run-up, especially if folks don't quickly forget the big run-up that the LendingClub had today, and what could be on the other side of earnings for SoFi. With SoFi, I think a lot of it, and I'll do another SoFi earnings video when we get closer to the date, but I think a lot of it's going to be on user acquisition and monthly active users. I think that's still going to be a big piece of the puzzle for them. All right, so we see here right at close, and I think we might have just hit the closing bell, sort of continued to struggle down a little bit here, and the MACD, though, closing in a little bit. So we might have a bit of a bullish crossover here, sort of quashing the rest of that bearish momentum, which will give us a nice lead in into the after hours and see if there's still something left on the bone for buyers to chew on through the after hours and tomorrow's pre-market and tomorrow's trading day. All right, well, I hope you had a good one today, and I hope that you finish off your week strong tomorrow. I certainly appreciate you watching, and I wish you the best. I will see you in the next video.